All righty, welcome back. We're finishing out Matthew chapter 27 now and just getting into the edge of Matthew chapter 28. Matthew devotes an entire chapter. Of course, he didn't write it in chapters and verses, but it's divided up that way. And so it's also divided that way for Mark and for Luke, whereas John gives so much material after the resurrection that those who divided up the Bible into chapter and verse gave him 2 chapters worth. He definitely has the lion's share of the information about the resurrection. So we're going to be jumping around a little bit here and doing what we can do to harmonize these different accounts. Matthew 28 and verse number 1. Let's just read one verse and then look at what Mark and Luke and John say. Now, after the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to look at the grave. And so there you have 2 women that Matthew mentions, and they were coming to the grave of Jesus, and it's as it began to dawn. Now, what do you think of as beginning to dawn? Well, I think of as the sun is still behind the horizon, but it's getting brighter in the eastern sky. That's what I think. Let's look at Mark's Gospel, chapter 16 and verse number 1. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, Matthew called her the other Mary, and Salome. Well, there's a third woman whom Mark mentions. Well, why didn't Matthew mention that third woman? Because they all have to make choices as to what they're going to include and what they're not going to include, okay? And so that's not a contradiction. We've just harmonized the two gospel accounts. And it says that they brought spices so that they might come and anoint him. Then verse number 2. Very early on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. And so how does that harmonize with what Matthew said? Well, Matthew said when it began to dawn. So maybe Matthew's definition of the beginning of the dawn is right after the sun breaks over the horizon. How about that? Okay? It doesn't contradict what Mark wrote. They can easily be harmonized. Now jump over to Luke's Gospel, Luke chapter 23, verse number 56, the last verse of that chapter. Then they, the women, returned and prepared spices and perfumes. And on the Sabbath they rested according to the commandment. So they rested from Friday evening, sundown, Saturday evening, sundown. Verse number 1 of Luke 24. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they came to the tomb bringing the spices which they had prepared. Okay, so does that contradict Matthew and Mark? They all use different expressions, early dawn, as it began to dawn, and when the sun had risen, okay? But there's enough light for them to see. Now, one last little look here at John's Gospel, because John, he's the toughest to harmonize. Verse number 1 of John chapter 20. Now, on the first day of the week, and may I point out that they all agree it was the first day of the week, okay? It was Sunday morning. On the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene, well, that harmonizes perfectly with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but he doesn't mention any other woman. Mary Magdalene came early to the tomb. Now, listen to this. While it was still dark, and saw the stone already taken away from the tomb. So, John says it was still dark, whereas everyone else said basically the dawn had broken, the sun had risen. Well, how do you harmonize that? Well, there's lots of ways to harmonize it. It can still be dark right after the sun has risen. It's going to get considerably lighter than what it was just before the sun rises, but it still could be considered dark. Or, as some have suggested, it's possible that Mary, because John doesn't mention the other Mary or Salome or any other women for that matter, if you read John's Gospel by itself, you would think it was Mary Magdalene only by herself going to the tomb. And so is it possible that she by herself got up while it was still dark and went to the tomb, and she saw that the stone had been taken away, and that's all she saw. She just got to the tomb, it's still dark, and oh my goodness, the stone's been moved. And she would conclude, somebody's rolling away the stone. She hasn't seen an angel at this point in time. There's been nothing supernatural going on. She just recognizes, oh my goodness, in the dark I can see that the stone has been rolled. And so what does she do? She does what Luke also said she did, but doesn't tell it in the exact same order. Verse number 2 of John 20. And so she ran and came to Simon Peter and to the other disciple whom Jesus loved. We've already heard that expression, probably John, the author of this gospel. And said to them, they have taken away the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him. See, so it would seem that if she had seen an angel, as we see in the synoptic gospels, by that point in time, she wouldn't have said those exact words to Peter and John. She'd have said, and I saw an angel, and here's what the angel explained. But she's concluding that somehow they've moved the body of Jesus. Okay? And so that's when, of course, Peter and John run to get to the tomb to investigate for themselves, and they see the very same thing. Again, no angels, no resurrected Jesus. But they do venture now inside of the tomb of Christ, and they see the linen wrappings lying there with the face cloth put off onto one side. And that's when it says, John says, they believed because they knew there had been a resurrection because of the cocoon, the empty cocoon that they saw of those linen wrappings. Okay? And of course, Mary didn't just stay back at that point in time. She probably ran around and got her friends, and then they all ran back to the tomb and got there around the same time that Peter and John were done with their investigation. And when Peter and John leave, that's when supernatural things start happening. Okay? And so putting it all together, you can piece it together by looking at all four accounts and saying, these are not contradictory, these are harmonious, and I need to figure out how they all fit together. Because they're so truncated, they're trying to get across to us, all of them are trying to get across to us the salient points, the most important points. All right, I can't wait to talk about this more next time. We're going to get deep, deep, deep in the resurrection of Christ. So, see you then. God bless.
Heavenward 7 is made possible by the financial support of viewers like you. Thank you.